Welcome, everyone, to the Next Best Picture podcast. And today we are talking with David Simpson, Chris Zay, and Freddy Salazar, part of the visual effects team from Civil War. Thank you so much for joining us today, gentlemen.
Pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to talk to all of you about this movie, especially because now having rewatched it, I can genuinely say I did not know what I was going to ask you about because I wasn't sure what in the movie was actually visual effects versus what was captured in camera. So that was a lot of fun for me. But I wanted to start with a relatively simple question, I hope, for anyone listening who does not know. We have David, who is the visual effects supervisor, Chris, who was the visual effects on set and compositing supervisor, and Freddy was the CG supervisor. And for people who have no clue, what do all of you actually do? What is your role on the film?
Okay.
What's the difference between visual effects, special effects, CG?
Well, I'll go first. I was sort of the production VFX supervisor, so my job involved talking with Alex and sort of discussing what he wanted for the film and his vision for the film and how to implement and achieve that. So I was kind of more the point of contact for Alex from a VFX perspective. And I was on set for the big VFX set pieces, but I couldn't be there the whole time, which is where Chris stepped in, which is a good way for me to pass to Chris.
Oh, smooth. Yes, so, I mean, following that track on set, of course, it's, I guess, more the day-to-day runnings. It is sort of what David has sort of planned with Alex. And, you know, he, of course, briefed me very much what they had in mind and how the whole thing should ideally work. And then it's more about sort of the day-to-day execution, trying to keep on top of things, trying to sort of, you know, advise in the moment and or, you know, interfacing with the other departments. How we might shoot something that is visual effects heavy, what we build, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, also sort of being the compositing supervisor, that then sort of makes me a bit of a bracket because that part of the job is more or less at the very end of the process. So I was there kind of for the start and for the end because compositing, I would say, in a nutshell, is sort of where it all comes together. That sounds a bit vague right now before we discuss what the pieces are, but it's more or less like Photoshop, but for moving images. So, and all the things that go into your Photoshop, you know, need to be generated somehow unless they're shot, and they are generated, for instance, in CG, which is where I hand over to Freddy.
My job is mostly to keep everybody happy and to make it simple. Basically, I have to define the best workflow ever to technically coordinate all the different departments, all the different skills to make sure that we can serve the vision of the director and David, basically, to make sure that we can go as fast as possible. And the idea is to not feel any limits and to make sure we can everything on time and ideally to have one iteration a day, basically. So this is my job.
If you couldn't read between the lines here, basically Chris and Freddy did all the work and I took all the credit.
You go a bit far.
I would say, I'm sure that's not entirely true. Yeah, so as I said before, you know, it was difficult to tell while watching this what was captured live on set and what was added or just, you know, bumped up later in post-production. So I know that this was because Alex wanted everything to feel as naturalistic as possible. So thinking about that naturalism, is there a particular shot or sequence that you're especially proud of how it came out?
Okay. I feel like there is a there's a difference between kind of photorealism and realism, and I think every VFX film is going for photorealism. We all want everything to be photorealistic, but this film was a little bit different because what Alex really wanted was sort of authenticity and realism in the sort of purest sense of it. So were we extensively researched. We had a reference for every single shot in the film. So every VFX shot has a real world reference that is attached to it, from documentaries, from war zone photography, from newsreels. And we would study those real examples to try and dial in exactly what it was that made us sort of feel shock or made us feel fear or and anxiety. So we were trying to sort of recreate reality as much as possible, and we were really took it very seriously. For me, probably my favorite shot is sort of a nice overlap between the practical SFX and the VFX side of things. And it's in one of Lee's flashbacks, there's a shot of a man being set on fire. And it's a really kind of harrowing shot and a harrowing moment. And we did that by fire is always a nightmare in visual effects. It's really hard to get fire right because it doesn't, it's difficult to get the speed, especially if it's in slow motion, and to get the movement, to get the exposure. So I'd sort of suggested maybe we could set fire to a physical object on set to see how bright the fire would be, how fast the fire would be. And the SFX team got us a mannequin, which was more than we'd asked for, and dressed it in the same costume, and we set fire to the mannequin from the same point of view as the camera. And originally that was all just going to be reference. It was just going to be an example of what it might look like. But the shot was so good and it was so close to the original that we ended up doing more of a kind of comp role and combined the two together. So when the fire catches on and you see like the clothes move and a little lick and movement of it, that it is more than we would ever have got with a simulation. It has all those little nuances that you would have had to have manually put in for a simulation. And the reason why it's my favorite shot is because we had a Q&A recently, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said that she wouldn't watch that shot, and she closed her eyes every time that it came up because she'd mistakenly thought it was stock footage and she didn't want to see it. So that's my new favorite type of invisible visual effect, where it's so invisible it's because everyone's closed their eyes and not looked at it. That's my favorite shot.
That's a pretty good definition, I think, of invisible effect. I hadn't heard that one yet. Yeah, it's a bit like picking one of your favorite children, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, I always like sort of the slightly unassuming ones. I find sort of the ones that you would not guess in a million years are VFX. The ones that sometimes even I forget actually until, I see the movie at some point. I thought, oh yeah, of course, yeah. And sometimes those are things that probably aren't particularly glamorous. They can be as simple, I say with massive air quotes, as paint outs. I mean, we've done a good few paint outs because, let's say it was shot somewhere on location on the road and there weren't supposed to be any other cars there. But then, if it's a reasonably wide shot, there might be gazillions of cars there, and they might be all sorts of things there that are undesirable or whatever. And suddenly you have this massive enterprise, of a lot of people working just to sort of remove something. And sometimes that can be incredibly tricky, incredibly challenging. Like I say, it's probably not something that you often talk about because it doesn't feature a lot of technology per se, but it's hard graft. And when it works, I find it almost as magical as, something that is technology driven.
Okay. Yeah, about me, honestly, it's going to be difficult to choose because I think everything was not easy for me. It was a full package. Sorry about this, I'm going to disappoint you, but I don't have a specific one because for me it was important from the beginning to the end to never do anything that looked wrong. to never get the audience going out of the movie. It was really, really important to always keep the attention, to always keep the tension. Because for me, what was difficult on a lot of shots was to keep the camera almost so static. You have time to look at walls. You have time to look at the parking in front of supermarket with almost nothing. You know what I mean? It's a lot of tension for us as artists to make sure that we can drive the eyes with almost nothing to show. So basically, a lot of this was really interesting for me. And maybe one that I liked because it's more for the story. At some point, we have an helicopter between the buildings in the street, and it's something going to happen. And at some point, we're working inside the building because everything has been done inside with the offices, with the desk, with everything. I mean, we haven't been shy and we've been really far. And at some point, we talked about the shape of the windows. Are they square, rectangular, oval, maybe a bit round? Let's make them fully round. I mean, we went at this kind of detail. It's stupid, and people didn't get it, I'm sure. But for us, it's this kind of level how far we've been to make sure that we serve the story and we drive the eyes as much as we can. So this is why, for me, all of it was really a pleasure, to be honest.
It's really great hearing that all the different perspectives from each of you on what was so special and interesting about working on this film. And I love that you each have something different that you pointed out about that. One of the shots in this movie that really has stayed with me, even from first seeing the film back when it was released, is it's a relatively short scene of them driving through a forest fire. And I don't know how much of that was, the stuff that you were able to do on set versus what was CG, but uh, sort of bouncing off something that David had said about fire being very difficult to do in visual effects. What is that sort of sweet spot between making these pixels feel real and not like they've been added in digitally?
So that sequence is just mesmerizing. It's such a beautiful sequence, and it sort of plays in a little bit to kind of our ideology in terms of shooting. We sort of had a rule, Alex and I, that we would try to shoot something for real and always try to get something real in front of the camera. No matter kind of how small or insignificant, if there's something real, it gives you something to kind of anchor onto and to sort of use as a route. So for that sequence, that is the SFX guys and JD pretty much entirely. They came up with this sort of groundbreaking system for the forest fire. First off, you have to protect the forest, and JD would be able to explain this a lot better than I can, but they plumbed sprinkler systems into the canopies throughout the forest so that if anything went wrong, it would douse it with thousands of gallons of water almost instantly. And in wherever there was a safe area, where there was sort of a gap in the trees, we had these things that were called flame trees, which are like metal structures, sort of angular metal structures that you could have the flames sort of wired into and lit up. And they would create sort of a gas flame. And then for the embers, we had our cast in their car. Then we had a great big truck with a kiln on the back that we called our ember generator, and it was pumping out these embers. And that would drive in front of the cast's car. So as they're driving down the road, they're driving into the trail left behind by the truck. And then in front of that was a minibus with a monitor where Alex and myself and Rob would sit, and we would watch the footage as we're driving down the roads, because we're driving 1.5 miles. So it would be very difficult to have a cable that long to get to the monitor. So that's pretty much all in camera. And it was such a magical and captivating scene on the day. And it was just sort of everything you shot. It was beautiful. Rob and Alex were just having the time of their lives, because no matter where they put the camera, it was stunning. And in the end, really all we did in VFX was every so often the two vehicles would get a little bit too far apart, and there would be a gap in the embers, and we would have to fill in the gap. But we had such great reference before and great reference after, we just needed to make sure it was invisible in between. And the other thing we did on those metal trees with the spiky bits, we put the real tree over the top of the metal. So what you would normally think you would do in this situation is you would add the flames to the forest. We did it the other way around, and we kind of added the forest to the flames so that we burnt a wooden tree as opposed to a metal one. That's how that one was done. That was a really long answer. Sorry about
No, it's great. That's so cool. So when you're adding these embers, it's, all this the visual references you have, I'm sure that helps make it a little easier, right? But it's not as simple as, I'm assuming anyway, that it's not as simple as, like copying with a magic lasso and pasting into a different part of the
that.
screen.
No, not at all. If anything, it makes it harder
Yeah.
because we found there are things like, for instance, as the car drives along the road, there are embers that sit on the floor. So as the tire goes over it, it pulls them up and flings them into the air and they break apart and tear apart. And things like that, you wouldn't necessarily think to put in a simulation. You wouldn't instantly go, well, we'll do it so that when it runs over the tire, it tears and things like that. You just wouldn't think of it. But when you're confronted with reality and you have to live up to the expectations of that reality, then it becomes all these nuances you have to put in and all you have to fine tune and tweak everything.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's And one of the other things that I noticed, especially this time while watching it, is that there's a lot of forcing of perspective in this movie. There's a lot of focus shifts between the foreground and background. And I don't know exactly how many of those are visual effects shots specifically, but with shots like that, I assume that that makes your work more difficult, but does it?
When you're talking about, just so I can clarify the question, when you're talking
So
about the focus, whatever,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, with the focus shifts, if you're, initially working on, like a building with a pillar of smoke or something in the background of a shot, and we rack focus at one point to have a more clear image of that, is that something that's more difficult to do in visual effects, or
Well,
not so
Chris here is
much?
our master of lenses, so I'm going to pass to Chris because he's very very good at this.
Yeah, I'd say sometimes is the very unhelpful answer. I mean, it can be as straightforward as working the whole thing as a sharp image and then sticking a defocus on it. But it can be really complicated. It really depends a little bit on what the shot exactly is. I mean, I'm not entirely sure which shots you have in mind that you're thinking about. I mean, one thing that I thought was quite challenging at times was generally the camera work is very fluid. So there's a lot of sort of these stabilized carried around cameras. So you have to at least make sure that all the tracking is correct. You have to make sure that sort of all the things that do indeed happen in lenses, which of course is a little bit more than just tracking. There's always some sort of distortion-y things and vignette-y things and all sorts of kind of quirky lens characteristics that you need to sort of take into consideration. And yes, that might totally happen through a focus pull as well. I mean, a focus pull more often than not in itself makes your image, breathe a little bit and stuff like that. Sure, all these things play a role. Sorry again, like David, that was probably a very, very long answer for a very brief question. But yes, sometimes it can make it a lot harder.
No, it makes total sense. I and another because I ever get again everything in this film looks so real and like it was captured in camera. How many visual effects or CG shots actually are there in the film?
So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. We have over 1,100. Um,
Wow.
and I know this because the number 1,118 was always written in massive letters in our office on a whiteboard, and it would gradually the number would change. But yeah, I think it's about 1,100-ish. But
that sounds
some of
like a
them
lot.
are. It was quite a lot. Some of them are quite small. Some of them are quite subtle. There are things like we painted out planes in the sky because it's supposed to feel like a no-fly zone, and they wanted that kind of eerie sense of isolation. And then some are full. Every pixel is CG behemoth. We're recreating an entire city, and so there's either ends of a spectrum.
It's yeah. You know that when you're recreating the city, I'm thinking specifically of, those shots over DC. You have the helicopters as they're approaching and all. It seems like as the movie goes, we're getting more gunfire, we're getting more explosions, getting more of these things, and then you get to that final sequence. It's like an all-on assault on the senses. How closely do you guys work with like the sound team on sequences like that when there's so much happening?
Yeah, I mean, Glenn and Howard, who are the sound kind of mixing team and design team on this, they did such an incredible job, and it's so violent and visceral. Um, we so it's interesting, and I think the reason why that end sequence is so impactful is because up until that point, whenever you hear a gun shot or a gun go off, there is danger associated with it. Whether that is at the mass grave with Jesse Plemons' soldier, or at the kind of commercial district where the guys in the Hawaiian shirts are, and someone gets pinned down, and you see them get shot. Like there is every point prior danger associated with gunshots and the sound of gunshots. And then when you get to that final moment and that big 15 minutes and it's gunshots everywhere, there is this sort of chaos and carnage. And I think that we kind of have it wired into us at that point that it is terrifying and dangerous and threatening. We did, in terms of the sound effects, we obviously it's involved in the edit, and they sync them up based on when we put muzzle flashes or we put tracers in. For the most part, our muzzle flashes are real and they're from blanks on set, but every so often we paint in an extra one just because they wanted more or they wanted more gunfire. But generally, yeah, it was all sort of organic back and forth between editorial. So we would feed editorial, editorial would feed sound, and then backwards and forwards in that, with editorial being this kind of buffer in the middle.
Nice. I like that. The communal, everybody working together. It's great.
Alex is a huge fan of that kind of collegiate working experience, and he's great. He will accept. He's one of these people that won't turn down a good idea. You work with some people and they're very kind of possessive about their kind of ideas. But with Alex, yeah, we've had like a junior VFX artists that have suggested something, and it's been such a good idea that you take it straight to Alex, and he just rolls with it and builds it in, and he won't turn down a good idea no matter where it comes from. He's very welcoming and collaborative.
Love that. I love to hear that. And we're coming up on the end of our time together.
Oh,
But
I'm sorry.
before, no, no, no. But before we go, I just had one question to ask that I have to ask. It's the big topic of the day, AI, artificial intelligence. And I feel like some of the things that that they say it is capable of kind of feels like things that have sort of been part of visual artists' digital toolkits for a while, just sort of repackaged as this AI thing. So, considering the work that you all do and how you've seen this kind of technology progress over the years, what do you think is the place of AI in movie making, if at all?
So I I think that there's different kind of flavors of AI,
Hmm.
different sort of different kind of genres of AI, should we say? So you have machine learning, which VFX has used for years. You have, I don't think anyone's going to object to a better algorithm for scaling up and down images, things like that in AI. I think we can all get behind. What I think a lot of people mean when they talk about AI now, particularly, is they're talking about generative AI, and they're talking about, you put a prompt in and an image comes out. And, if that's kind of what you're after in terms of your kind of workflow, and that's kind of what you just want something, you just want it to give you something, you don't really want to noodle it or invest in it, then yeah, that's a thing that you can do. It would have been the worst thing for this film, because for this film, Alex and the VFX guys, we were so careful about what our references were, and we wanted it only to be real, and we wanted it only to take reference from real things, and we wanted to choose what those real things were. It would have been a mistake to use AI where you can't control what your references are, because it would have added like a robot intermediary between us, and we were trying to just get as close to reality as humanly possible, and artificiality in the middle would have been a distraction from that. It would have been the opposite of what we were trying to do. So I think for Civil War, we wanted realism, and as much as you can sort of tweak and noodle an algorithm, it would have been inappropriate, because we wanted to show our subject material respect. We wanted to treat it respectfully, and it would have been a mistake to lean on AI in that way.
Yeah, if I may add, I would also say that AI, of course, is trained on something. So it depends a lot on sort of, where it gets its ideas from. And, like David is saying, being so specific about what exactly it is you want, I think it can inform a creative process. If you want an alien in a restaurant or something like that, and you can say, make me an alien in a restaurant, at least you have something to look at. And then you can say, like, maybe, I don't know, should be green, not blue, or something like that, and it can therefore sort of inform where you're going. But with something like we've been doing, I don't know. I mean, I've not really played with AI much myself, but I think the danger would have been that, it just sources stuff from places where it shouldn't come from made up imagery, because I suppose specifically when it comes to images, chances are there's a lot more movies out there than there's actually real footage out there in high quality, and it was supposed to be not movie-like, not sort of that style.
Yeah. In this case, I have to add something as well, then. Everybody said something. No, I fully agree with what they said, obviously. Me, I played a lot with AI because I'm curious about what it's going to be in the future and how we can use it as a tool, to be honest. And playing a lot with it, I fully agree with the guys, because when you have to create an emotion visually, it's tricky to explain this in a prompt, and to say, make it nice, make it beautiful. And so far, I haven't seen anything able to do this. And this is why I agree with David. It was impossible to go this way for this kind of movie. So yeah, for me, it makes sense that we haven't been close to this so far.
Absolutely. And like I said, it all the hard work that you guys put into this, it shows on the screen. And I think there's no better testament to it than that. So David, Chris, Freddy, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for your work on this film.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.